Ma'am, where are your citizenship documents? The real ones, not just a driver's license.
Excuse me, who asked for those?
People like you always seem suspicious. Let me see proof of citizenship.
The security cameras at the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport captured the moment lead ICE agent Richard Rubio's voice cut through the terminal like a blade. He stood at the checkpoint, chest out, demanding ancestral lineage documents tracing back 3 generations. Rubio was 15 years into his career, a veteran of dozens of deportations with a spotless record and a fat federal pension waiting for him at the finish line. He felt untouchable. He looked at the woman standing before him and told her she needed to produce expired visas from her childhood, all of them, claiming they needed to verify people like her. Katrina Wright stood perfectly still. She had her carry-on at her feet and was dressed in simple jeans, a gray sweater, and comfortable walking shoes. She wasn't wearing anything flashy or memorable. In fact, she looked exactly how she wanted to look. Invisible. Rubio circled her, his 2 colleagues flanking him like palace guards. He leaned in, asking with a sneer if she understood what he was saying or if he needed to explain it slower. Travelers nearby began to slow their pace. Phones emerged from pockets as the tension thickened. What Rubio didn't realize was that every second of this was being archived by high-definition security cameras from every angle. And what he did next wouldn't just cost him his badge. It would cost him his freedom and expose a secret he'd kept buried for nearly a decade. If you're ready to see institutional racism get dismantled, do me a favor. Like this video and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now. You won't want to miss our upcoming stories about people who mess with the wrong person and find out the hard way. Now let's talk about who Katrina Wright really was, because Agent Rubio didn't have a clue, and that ignorance was about to unravel his entire life. Katrina was a retired federal judge. She had spent 40 years in the American legal system. She was the youngest black woman ever appointed to the federal bench in Minnesota, and the first to preside over immigration and deportation proceedings in the entire Midwest region. She had ruled on hundreds of cases, dismantled countless bad faith arguments, and stared down federal agents who thought their badges gave them a license to be bullies. But looking at her in that airport line, you'd never know it. Since her retirement in 2022, Katrina had cultivated a life of quiet anonymity. She gardened in her St. Paul bungalow and volunteered at the local library under her maiden name. Being seen for 40 years had come with a heavy cost: death threats, protesters, and the constant weight of being a symbol. She had made herself a ghost in plain sight. But Katrina Wright had memorized the Immigration and Nationality Act. She could recite Fourth Amendment protections in her sleep. For years, she had watched agents like Richard Rubio bend the rules and target people who didn't know their rights. She knew exactly what he was doing at that checkpoint. As the crowd of travelers grew, Rubio's colleagues started looking uneasy, shifting their weight and glancing around. Rubio, however, doubled down. He told her that if she couldn't produce proof of citizenship, that he was authorized to detain her. Katrina finally spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, and carried the weight of 4 decades of judicial authority. She told him quietly that under Section 287 of the Immigration and Nationality Act, he was authorized to conduct inspections at ports of entry, but that this specific checkpoint was not a port of entry. She told him he had no reasonable suspicion to detain her. Rubio blinked, momentarily stunned. Katrina didn't stop. She explained that under the Fourth Amendment, she was protected from unreasonable searches and seizures, and that a valid state-issued driver's license was sufficient for domestic travel. She told him point blank that he was not legally entitled to demand ancestral documentation. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder. Rubio's face turned a deep shade of red. As he asked her where she'd gotten her legal education, Katrina responded by citing Title 8 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Section 287.8. She explained that his authority to question extended only to individuals reasonably suspected of immigration violations, and that since she had presented valid government ID, he had zero grounds to stop her. One of Rubio's colleagues coughed. The other checked his watch, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. Rubio stepped even closer, his voice dropping to a low hiss. He told her she was being awfully rude for someone who might not even belong here. He suggested that maybe she was undocumented after all. The crowd gasped. A young woman nearby shook her head in pure disgust. Katrine reached into her wallet with a slow, deliberate motion, the same way she used to call a courtroom to order. She pulled out a card with an embossed seal and an official photograph. It read, Katrina Grace Wright, United States Federal Judge, retired, District of Minnesota. She held it up for him to see. Rubio froze. The color drained from his face so fast, it was like someone had pulled a plug. Recognition finally hit him. He wasn't just looking at a judge, he was looking at the judge. Back in 2015, during a high-profile deportation case, Rubio had testified against an immigrant family. He had handled the evidence himself. The judge in that case had asked him sharp, relentless questions that almost exposed the fact that he tampered with the documents. That judge had been Katrina Wright. Rubio started to stammer, claiming he didn't know who she was. Katrina cut him off softly, and she said that not knowing was exactly the problem, that he had assumed, profiled, and threatened her without probable cause. Airport security finally intervened, asking Rubio to step aside. His colleagues backed away immediately, clearly trying to distance themselves from the radioactive mess he'd just created. Katrina gathered her bags, her face a mask of calm, but her mind was already working. The way Rubio had used the phrase special verification process, it was a niche term, a bit of coded language she'd heard ICE agents use when they were running operations off the books. She realized that if Rubio was still using these tactics, this wasn't just a one-time racist encounter. This was evidence of a systemic operation she had suspected years ago but couldn't prove. Katrina didn't fail twice. When she got back to her bungalow in St. Paul, she went straight to her laptop. The video of the encounter had already gone viral. 20,000, 50,000, then 100,000 views. But she wasn't looking at the view count. She was looking for details. At the 2:43 mark, the audio captured Rubio mentioning that special verification process. It was shorthand for operations that ignored protocol. Katrine went to her closet and pulled out a locked metal box. Inside were case files and a manila envelope left to her by her mentor, Thaddeus Franklin, a legendary civil rights attorney. Thaddeus had died in 2020, but he'd left her notes on the 2015 Reyes family deportation case. In that case, the Reyes family had been accused of using fraudulent documents. Katrina had questioned why the documents ICE submitted were different from what the family claimed to have filed. She had noticed that the ink and paper stock suggested the fraudulent documents were actually created after the family had been arrested. Rubio had been the sole handler of that evidence. Thaddeus's notes documented a pattern. Other families, other agents, all using the same special verification language right before evidence mysteriously shifted in favor of deportation. Katrina's phone rang. It was an unknown number from Washington, D.C. It was Elena Vasquez, a senior investigator with the DOJ Civil Rights Division. Vasquez admitted she'd been reviewing ICE operations off the books for 18 months because she felt something had been missed in the Reyes case. She told Katrine she could pull the internal records, but she needed a judge's eye to connect the dots. Then another message popped up in Katrina's inbox from a software engineer named Jordan Ellis. Ellis had been at the airport and had recorded the whole thing in 4K. He offered to isolate the background audio and track the metadata. He mentioned that Rubio's team had destroyed his cousin's family 3 years prior. Katrina downloaded the files. In the crystal clear audio, she heard Rubio's colleague muttering about how Rubio was pushing the stop because of quota pressure and a streamlined process. Katrina cross-referenced that with Thaddeus's notes. The term appeared 6 times in cases where families were deported on suspicious evidence. Katrina realized that Richard Rubio had been involved in 47 deportation cases since 2010. 32 of them involved disputed evidence, and Rubio had been the primary handler in every single one. This was a system that rewarded efficiency over accuracy and turned human lives into niche statistics for performance metrics. Katrina spent the next 3 days in a coffee shop with Vasquez and Ellis, cross-referencing digital footprints and internal audits. Ellis discovered that Rubio used the handle Border Watch 47 on encrypted forms, where he coached other agents on how to streamline removals by forging submission timestamps and notary seals. Katrina drafted an 83-page formal complaint backed by video, audits, and digital evidence. She filed it at 11:47 p.m., and by 2 a.m., Rubio was leaving her desperate voicemails, pleading with her to work it out. The investigation launched within 72 hours. A few weeks later, they all met in a federal building in downtown Minneapolis for a DOJ hearing. Katrina sat at the plaintiff's table, watching as the security footage of Rubio's aggression played on a large screen. She presented the 2015 Reyes case, Thaddeus's research, and the digital evidence Ellis had uncovered. Rubio's attorney tried to claim Katrina had a personal vendetta, but the lead investigator pointed out that Katrina's judicial record was remarkably balanced. Then came the knockout blow. Ellis projected Rubio's encrypted messages onto the screen, showing him discussing creative solutions for problem cases with his supervisors. Rubio sat there, ashen-faced, as the room went silent. When asked if he authored the posts, Rubio couldn't deny it. The investigator recommended his immediate termination and federal charges for obstruction of justice and civil rights violations. The fallout was massive. Rubio and 4 other agents were charged. 2 supervisors were ousted. A forgery ring that had been operating for over a decade was dismantled. 17 families, including the Reyes family, were cleared for repatriation. The DOJ even established the Thaddeus Franklin Oversight Fund to conduct bias audits and independent reviews of immigration enforcement. Katrina Wright didn't go back to her ghost life. She began mentoring young civil rights attorneys, teaching them that laws don't discriminate, but people do. She taught them how to spot the patterns and how to use the law as a shield for the vulnerable. Richard Rubio was eventually convicted and sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. On the day he was sentenced, Katrina visited Thaddeus's grave. She told him she was finally ready to fight. Justice isn't always a viral moment or a satisfying mic drop. Sometimes it's the slow, methodical work of someone who refuses to be dismissed. Katrina Wright proved that one checkpoint encounter can unravel years of corruption if you're brave enough to stand your ground. If you like this story, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive. Share this video with someone who needs to see justice in action. And before you go, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear what stood out to you most about Judge Wright's stand. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.